can join us. So welcome Hannah, thank you. We have Hannah here, who's a program specialist in the Office of Digital Humanities at the National Endowment for the Humanities. So Hannah, I'm sure you'll tell us a little bit about yourself. But what Hannah does is that she oversees the fellowship's open book program, and we'll hear more a little later. She does have a PhD in comparative literature from the University of Texas at Austin. And so I also want to thank, along with Hannah, my colleague Justin, who's on the call, and PhD student in English department, Sere, for both bringing the opportunity to my attention, that NEH was going to be offering this session where they would come visit anybody who wanted. So I sort of put in a request, and Hannah was the one to respond, and here we have her today. In general, for those of you who've been to one of these sort of career discussions before, usually we go straight and dive into questions. Today, Hannah has a PowerPoint presentation for about the first 20 minutes. During her talk, feel free to put your questions in the chat box. Some of you have already sent in questions. So after the 20 minutes is done, Hannah will be able to answer any questions that you guys have as well. So Hannah, I'm gonna just leave this to you now to present and go off video, and see you after the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me today, and for all of you who have joined. And I especially want to say hello to Sarah and Sasha, who are new interns at the NEH, who they just started today, and we haven't even talked yet. So it's great to see you here. So, you know, what I'm going to do, we, as Rashmi said, we have been giving these presentations to different institutions as a way of connecting with the humanities community virtually during this weird time. I'm calling in from my childhood bedroom, and my parents are here, so if you hear noises, that's what that is. And so I have sort of a presentation that I've been giving, so I'm just going to kind of give that presentation. I hope that you'll find it useful, and I hope that it will answer some of your questions. And then, of course, we'll have lots of time to talk after the fact. So let's see if I can get this going. I am sharing my screen. I am playing my slides. All right. So I am Hannah Alpert-Abbrams. I work in the Office of Digital Humanities at the National Endowment for the Humanities. And if you want to know more about us, we have a pretty active Twitter presence. So feel free to follow us or me on Twitter. This morning, I was sort of setting up slides for this talk, and I found out that right down the street from my apartment in DC, there's these baby hawks, which my colleague Jacqueline Clement, who also works at the NEH, has been photographing every day. So there's going to be a lot of hawks in this slideshow today. So this morning, I got a bunch of questions from you all. I'm sure that you'll have more questions. The questions, you know, are really about how do you think about your position in the humanities as a graduate student? How do we think about what preparing for a future, a professional future, both within academia and then especially beyond academia, and potentially in the world that I occupy, which is the world of federal funding. More generally, you know, how do you get out of the tenure track logistically? How do you get out of it emotionally? And then what's involved in working beyond the tenure track? So I'm going to kind of address those with a two-part presentation today, and I'll try, I know you don't usually give presentations, so I'll try to be brief, but I'll be talking first about career pathways, about how I left my original plan, which was to be a professor of literature, to come work at the NEH, and then I'll talk about what we actually do at the NEH and in the Office of Digital Humanities, and how working at the NEH has given me a much bigger picture of what it means to be a humanist in the world. So I've been asked by a lot of institutions recently to come and speak about having a professional career in the humanities, And it's a really hard time to have that conversation because of what's happening in the world. And, you know, I can give a really happy talk about how great my job is, which is true, and how many opportunities there are outside of academia, which is real. But it would be disingenuous not to pretend that this is a really difficult time. Not to, yes, I got lost in the double negatives. It would be disingenuous to pretend that we're not feeling angry and scared and anxious and overwhelmed by the events that are happening right now and by what they might mean for the future of all of the humanities and of higher ed. What I have found useful during times of disruption like the one that we're in is to really focus on finding a professional mission. And this is something that I take from Gabrielle Foreman, who's a faculty member of history. And she says, she calls on scholars working within higher education and beyond to really think about aligning our time and energy with the things that we want to achieve. And thinking about that not necessarily in terms of our own individual success, but also about what we want to do for our communities. So she asks people to think about, who are you? What are your values? What is your mission? She says, write it down, let it be your North Star. And she, on Twitter a few years ago, she published her own professional mission statement, which I'm showing here, which was to create, sustain, be in, empower, and recover collectives working not just for inclusion and equity, but for justice. She writes, I seek to surround myself with and help create collaborative rather than competitive spaces, and I seek to leave a legacy as an amplifier of my various communities' past and present talents, energies, and struggles for justice. So I start talks about working in the humanities and leaving higher ed with Gabrielle's mission statements, because it was reading this tweet a few years ago that made me think about what I wanted to be and what work I wanted to do in the world. And that eventually led me to step away from the tenure track. I followed Gabrielle's lead in writing my own professional mission statement. And this is the one that I came up with as someone trained in comparative literature and digital humanities. I said that I want to use technology to work against inequity, improve transparency, and build community. And then I want to advocate for and educate about publicly funded higher education in the humanities. I also said that I want to build relationships within a local community, to spend time with people I love, and to resist professional scope creep. And once I found that mission, it became a lot easier to understand what kinds of jobs would allow me to pursue those goals and what kinds of jobs really wouldn't. And one of the things that I discovered was that while there are faculty positions that would allow me to pursue that mission, not every faculty position is a good fit for those goals. And meanwhile, it allowed me to think about other professions that actually were better fits for me. So in my case, I worked in a number of different fields. When I was a graduate student, I got a research assistantship at the Latin American Library at the University of Texas. So I worked in special collections and digital humanities there. I then worked with librarians to apply for an NEH grant, which I ended up managing through the library. So I was still employed by the library, but I was also a project manager. That led me to apply to become a postdoctoral fellow for the Council of Library and Information Resources, which is a postdoctoral fellowship specifically for humanists interested in transitioning into working in academic libraries. My experience in special collections enabled me to get a position at the John Carter Brown Library, where I worked again with rare books and manuscripts, before eventually transitioning to the NEH, where I now oversee the grant program that awarded me my first grant. So it's a roundabout career, but what all of those jobs have had in common is that I've been working at the intersection of digital resources, historical memory, and community outreach, which is really at the center of what I do. So all of that leads me to what it is that I actually do in my job. I am here today representing the Office of Digital Humanities. And so part of what my responsibility is to tell you about what I do and also about what we do. And like I said when I started, I really hope that this will help you see what it's done for me, which is allow you to see the big picture of what it means to be a humanist, professional humanist. So I work at the National Endowment for the Humanities in the Office of Digital Humanities. Any of you who may be trained in DH know that the question, what are the digital humanities, is kind of a joke because it's so hard to define this field. Our position at the NEH is that we do not care. You can call DH whatever you want, unless you want federal funding for your research. And then it's really essential to understand how the Office of Digital Humanities functions. So to back up just a little, the NEH is a federal funding agency. We're one of several. The federal government distributes taxpayer dollars to a number of different agencies like the NIH and the NSF to support research and education in those fields. We don't get a lot of money compared to those other organizations. I like this slide. I made this slide for high school students, but I like showing it because it really does show where we fit in the scheme of federal funding. But we still do get quite a bit of money. We give out about $160 million of taxpayer funds a year. And this year we have an additional $75 million, which I'll talk about in a minute. And we give that money to researchers and teachers working K through 12, working in higher ed, and working at all kinds of public and nonprofit institutions like museums and libraries and historical societies. People who work in the study of language, of linguistics, of literature, history, law, philosophy, archaeology, religion, ethics, arts, and even some social sciences. So our definition of the humanities is really big. The money that we give out, it does a lot of stuff, and some of the things that it's used for is to compensate students, postdocs, and all kinds of humanities staff, to bring people together as a community, usually in person, but more recently we've been funding virtual meetings, to take time off of teaching to get professional development training or to do research, to hire all kinds of outside contractors to provide technical support, and sometimes even to buy equipment or build infrastructure. The NEH, we do a ton of stuff. These are the different divisions that we have. I work in digital humanities, but we also work in education, preservation and access, public programs, research. We do a lot of different work. Digital projects are funded all over the NEH, but in the office that I work in, we really focus on research that experiments with digital technologies for teaching and research, studying digital culture from a humanistic perspective, and then using digital platforms for publication and access. So I'm just, in the time that remains, gonna take a few minutes to tell you about some of the kinds of projects that we fund. And I think that this will also show you some of the kinds of people that we work with, all of whom have really interesting careers in the humanities. So one of our major grant programs is called the Digital Humanities Advancement Grant. This is our flagship research program for people conducting research in digital humanities. An example of these projects is something like the Mapping the Historic West End project. This was a $70,000 grant to build an app to bring together oral histories and archival records relating to the history of gentrification of a historically Black neighborhood in Charlotte. The project, the $70,000 that we gave to that project went to librarians, to a project manager, to archivists, and to contractors with technical skills. So all kinds of people who came together to do this work. Another example is the Breath of Life 2.0 project. This was a $300,000 project, so it's a lot bigger. at Miami University of Ohio. And this project is funding a group of Indigenous language revitalization workers working in the Maya language. They had built a digital archive already, and with the grant that we gave them, they were able to make that archive more sustainable, to support their own work in language revitalization, and then to do a major education initiative with other Indigenous communities who are doing revitalization efforts to help them utilize digital resources to kind of replicate this kind of project. Again, the money that we paid, it goes to software engineers, it goes to consultants, to a project coordinator, to student assistants, and to workshop participants. So again, all kinds of different people. We also support a lot of teaching in the Office of Digital Humanities. We support professional development through our institutes for advanced topics in the digital humanities. And so if some of you, I know some of you were asking questions about how do you develop digital skills? Well, these institutes, we fund about 5 or 6 a year. They're open to the public, and you can apply to attend one of these institutes to develop special training in your field. So this is just one example. Hosted by Purdue, Space and Place in Africana Black Studies. And so this brought together scholars of Africana Studies and Black Studies to think about the role of the digital in our understanding of space and place. And some of the people involved in that project were scholars, were faculty members, GIS specialists, librarians, students, and postdocs. And then finally, we support a lot of publication efforts, and I'm defining publication really broadly here. Our Division of Preservation and Access funds the digitization of historical archives and collections, as well as initiatives to make those collections more accessible and usable by the public. So this is just one example, $300,000 for the Charles Chestnut Digital Archive, putting those records online, transcribing them, developing metadata. All of that work is done by archivists, by librarians, by metadata experts of all kinds. But then we also fund the publication of open access scholarship. Our humanities and our fellowships open book programs. These are 2 initiatives run by the Office of Digital Humanities to take academic monographs and to make them freely available online. The humanities program funded projects like the Temple University Press Labor Collection. So they put, we gave them $81,000 to put a collection of books related to the study of labor history online. And those books are now freely available. So if you are a scholar stuck at home, unable to access your library, those projects make that information freely available for you. And we're about to announce, like literally any day now, a brand new project for more contemporary projects. So those were historical books, but this is for new scholarship that we're gonna fund, putting brand new monographs online for free. And of course, that sort of reflects our relationship with scholarly presses, with editors, acquisition editors, book editors, and all kinds of staff who work at scholarly presses. And then the last thing that I wanted to address before I turn this over to you for questions is the new program that is taking up pretty much all of my time right now, which is our NEH CARES program. So this is a brand new initiative as part of the CARES Act, which is the federal relief initiative for coronavirus relief. The federal government dedicated $75 million to the NEH in the form of relief funding. So it's our job to take those $75 million and to distribute them to humanists around the country whose work is at risk right now. I think this really speaks to the real importance of humanists in our economy, that we were recognized as part of this initiative, along with the National Endowment for the Arts and the Institute for Museum and Library Services. So as part of that program right now, we're reviewing applications for funds to support humanities labor, so people who have lost their jobs because of the humanities. Right now, we're supporting organizations. In the future, we'll also be supporting individuals. So I wanted to tell you about that project because, as I said, I think it really reflects the importance of the humanities and in the very fabric of our society. And one of the things that I really have come to recognize in reviewing thousands of proposals for this grant program, and also in preparing this talk today, is how much work we in the humanities and we in the digital humanities specifically do in times of crisis. You know, the projects that I've described today are dedicated to the preservation of historical memory, to providing historical context for current events, and to correcting misinformation about the present and about the past. And so, you know, whatever jobs you do and whatever your mission may be, I think that working in the humanities, you really have a lot of potential impact that you can have in these current events and then more broadly. So that is what I wanted to tell you about working at the NEH. Before we turn to questions, taking off my NEH hat and putting on my personal hat for a minute, here are some, I'm just listing some resources in the slides here that I have helped to develop for academic job seekers. The Academic Job Market Support Group is a database of job materials. So if you are going on the academic job market, you want to be a professor, there are like sample cover letters and teaching statements and stuff like that. There are also sample cover letters and teaching statements for people in ALTAC. So you can go take a look at that. If you are thinking about applying for postdoctoral positions, the Postdoctoral Laborers Bill of Rights lays out some of the mechanisms for evaluating and negotiating for better working conditions. And if you're thinking about working in some profession outside of the tenure track, the ALTAC Support Network is a database with people's names and contact information, people who pursued PhDs, some finished early, some graduated, or some left early and some graduated. All of them are volunteering their time to talk about their current jobs, how they transitioned, and to provide feedback for people like you. So the link at the bottom gives information about how to access those resources, and I hope that you'll take a look at those. So with that, I'm going to close this talk and turn it over to questions.
Thanks, Hannah. I think we got a good idea of sort of what you do and who you are personally. So I want to ask some questions that have been submitted to us prior that maybe we'll go more into detail. First, I'll ask very broad questions, and this is submitted. I don't know if the asker is here, but feel free to add your questions in the chat box too. The question is, what qualification or skill would you recommend humanities PhD students obtain to become competitive for jobs outside of academia? So just in general, what different skills do you recommend one work on?
So I don't. You know, I think that's probably more your area, Rajni, than mine. But when people ask me what digital skills they should develop, they usually ask me questions like, should I learn a programming language? Do I need to know how to use Omeka? Do I need to know how to use Scalar? Do I need to know, you know, R or Python or Java? And the answer that I always give is no. What's more important is that you are pursuing your own research questions in ways that engage with different methodologies that may be applicable outside of your field. So if you are interested in text analysis, and if your research question has to do with genre, then you might look and see what kind of digital humanities projects explore genre and text analysis. In that case, you might build a corpus of text, you might learn how to clean your corpus, you might end up learning how to use different algorithms to do text analysis, you might need to develop some skills in statistics. All of those are applicable outside of your field and are applicable in lots of different jobs, but they should come out of the questions that really motivate you and the areas that you're interested in. That said, work with other people. That's like the number one thing I would say that you can do. The humanities, for some reason, radically undervalues the benefits of collaboration in ways that make our work worse as researchers, as teachers, and then less transferable outside. So I think being able to demonstrate that you have collaborated with other people, that you have managed a project with multiple stakeholders, those kinds of things are really broadly applicable everywhere.
Okay. So Shirley has a question. When you were applying from, you say, a postdoc to the NEH, first let me ask, did you apply to a number of places, or did you apply first straight to the NEH? What does the application process look like?
Sure. Was that question specific to the NEH?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the process specific to NEH, and I just want to get your mindset as to where all you applied to when you first applied.
Yeah. So I was on the academic job market for 3 years. So I applied for faculty positions and for postdoctoral positions that had some kind of tenure track future, right? Although I always ended up in special collections for some reason. But that was really what my vision for myself was. Because I worked in libraries and I worked in digital humanities, during those 3 years, I did occasionally apply for library positions. And really that had to do with geography. I was in a relationship. I was trying to be with my partner. We were long distance. So if a library job showed up in the city I wanted to be in, I applied for those. But otherwise, I was really focusing on faculty jobs until the end of my 3rd year, when I decided that I was on a 1-year contract. I moved 5 times in 5 years, and I was done. And so I decided that my next job had to be a longer term contract than that. And so the NEH job just came up, and because I had worked with the NEH before, because I had applied for NEH grants and been awarded an NEH grant and gotten to know the people at the NEH, my friends actually let me know that this position opened up there. So it wasn't exactly that I was networking, but they did know that I was looking for a job, and they let me know that the position opened up. I applied for it and I got it. It was the first alt-ac job I applied for during that cycle. So I got very, very lucky in that sense. I didn't really have to go through a full-on career change job search.
So was this through the USA Jobs website?
Yeah, so that's how I applied. So to apply for a job at the NEH, you have to go through this really ridiculous exam. Or it's, I don't know how to describe it. They ask you a bunch of questions, and you have to sort of rank your capacity to. It'll say like, have you ever written a monograph? 1 through 5, you know? Have you ever worked with other people? 1 through 5. How experienced are you as a project manager? And then there's an algorithm that actually sorts the proposals, because so many people apply for jobs at the government level. And so the ODH, the NEH didn't see the proposals until you get through that first step. Once you get through that first step, all I did was write a cover letter and a resume, and then I had a half-hour phone call interview. That was it. Compared to academic jobs, I kind of was in shock because, you know, I think that it was such a it was not a laborious process to apply for the job.
So you said your background was in comparative literature. So what of your training during your PhD and your postdoc, what skills are you utilizing now in your current position?
Sure. So I use a lot of the skills that I developed in Complet. I am expected to keep up in the field of digital humanities. So I actually, you know, have to do research, not specific research on my own projects, but I have to be aware of where the cutting edge work is happening. I also review proposals. So I have to be able to read proposals in the field of digital humanities and determine their potential impact on the field and the quality of their design. And so I use a lot of, my knowledge of the discipline is really important. At the same time, I've had to very quickly familiarize myself with all kinds of fields I don't know about, like archaeology, linguistics, anthropology, things like that, musicology, which has been exciting, but has been possible because of my academic training. I do a lot of public speaking. So that was a skill I developed through conference, giving conference talks. I work with lots and lots of scholars. And so understanding academia has been really essential. And then beyond that, I use skills like project management and communications, which I would say I developed despite my graduate education, but that nevertheless has been really valuable for me.
Okay. Justin, do you have a question?
Sure. I'm wondering if you could talk about, since I know that you work with people, at universities who are applying for NEH grants, if you could talk about what you see as the biggest difference between your job, kind of working at a central humanities funding agency, and your counterparts on the other side who are applying for funding and kind of the work they do, and what you see as the big differences between those two and how they might fit into people thinking about like which path to consider for public humanities.
Sure. So the people that I work with most often are faculty and librarians and humanists, historians, public historians, things like that, who are applying for grants. So those are people in the Office of Digital Humanities. We do support scholars more than some of our, or faculty members more than some of our other divisions, which are more focused on libraries and archives and documentary filmmakers and podcasters and things like that. The people we work with tend to be faculty members. And so, I don't develop the research, I support the research that I think is worthy of support. I am involved in helping those people develop their ideas, to scope their projects meaningfully, to understand how to develop a budget, to figure out what kinds of collaborators might be necessary in order to develop meaningful and sustainable work. I also support the peer review process. So the people in my office, we find the people to review your projects to determine the quality of the work. And then we help with sort of the management of the budget. I work less with people, for example, in the Office of Sponsored Projects at universities. Those are the people who, if you're writing a grant at a university as a faculty member, those are the people that will help you get that grant submitted. That's a whole other career that I really didn't know about until I started at the NEH. And what those people have in common with me, I think, is that they work in lots and lots of different disciplines. They support faculty applying, from the humanities, from the sciences. They apply for NSF and NIH and NEH and Mellon and, all kinds of organizations. But they're more parallel to our Office of Grants Management. These are people who have really deep specialization in how budgets work, how money works, how universities distribute funds and things like that, what the law is. That's not really my area. That's sort of a slightly different space of the grants world than what I do.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yes.
Sort of thinking about the difference between supporting the research of others and kind of focusing on your own research. Was that hard making a transition from, as a faculty member, you're so focused on publishing your own stuff, and then in a role like this or in a role in a sponsored project, or a lot of other roles are about kind of supporting others' research, supporting the humanities more broadly. Was that a hard transition to make?
It was a really painful for my ego. I consider myself a very successful scholar. I really liked doing scholarship and the kind of conversations that I got to be a part of as a scholar. And so, yeah, it was really painful for me to be forced to take a back seat. But the kind of impact that I want to have, it's very hard to have as a scholar. Scholars have to write a monograph. And that is great and fun if you find that kind of thing fun, which I certainly did. but now I get to work with how can we make our funding more equitable. Now I get to work with how do we make sure community colleges have access to grant funding, or how can we push our tribal colleges and universities programs so that we can get more resources to those organizations, and how do we create platforms for digital humanities that is multilingual, which is one of the areas that I worked in, so I find that very exciting. And I do research on the side, and I am writing a book, and it's not going to be a monograph, which is kind of liberating, to be honest.
Nice. We have a question in the chat box saying, are you considering conducting your academic search simultaneously while doing this job, or?
Well, I did apply for one academic job this year. I don't think my colleagues know that, but I did. I was recruited, so I did apply for one faculty position. I withdrew because it took too long, and it was too complicated to be involved. I know I wouldn't have gotten it, but I did. I feel proud that I withdrew, I think it's very hard to go back to academia from a job like this for a few reasons. This is a full-time job, and I have choices about how I want to spend my time when I'm not working, and writing peer-reviewed scholarship is just not at the top of my list, which makes me a less viable candidate, especially when there are people who have published monographs and don't have tenure-track jobs, right? In addition, every year that I spend at the NEH, I become more senior in my profession, and the thought of going back to being an assistant professor in a first-year position is ridiculous. Academia will never hire me at the level that I should be at, because of the way the tracking works. And so I don't really see myself going back to the beginning in academia and trying to get tenure. That said, the right job. Someday I might consider it, but I think that it would be hard. And I think, one of my mentors told me, she was like, well, you can still stay in academia. And so I asked her, you've been on search committees, would you hire someone like me? And she said, no. I think that faculty are misleading you if they tell you that you can transition in and out from the tenure track like that. They want it to be true, but it's just not realistic right now.
Okay. And what does career growth within the NEH look like for you? What's the next step? How do people progress through from your role?
Sure. So it's pretty heavily ranked because we're a government agency. So we have program analysts who do a lot of office management, organizational work, communications. Program specialists are one rank up from that. That's what I am. I also do project management, communications, but I'm also responsible for program evaluation. So if we're trying to understand our impact on the field and sort of where we want to go next as an organization. The next spot for me would be a program officer, and they're the ones that manage the grant programs. You have to apply. There's no path to promotion in my job, so I'd have to apply for a program officer job if it were to become open. But as an internal applicant, it does look a little different from being an external candidate. It's pretty common, I think, for people to sort of move up in that way. And then you would become a division director, but lots of people spend their whole careers as program officers and are very happy. I work with Jen Cerventi, one of the greatest and most influential people in digital humanities. She is a lifer, a program officer for life. I might do that, but I do think there are other places. People go often into museums and libraries from here, especially because I have that background in special collections. Sometimes in administrative roles, a colleague of mine just became a curator. Another colleague took a role as a dean of a library. So, higher ed administration is an area that I'm interested in, but I've only been in this job for 1 year, so we'll see.
So say I have absolutely no experience with the digital humanities. Is there some sort of training available? Where do you recommend starting for someone with no digital humanities training?
Yeah, that's a great question. So like I said, I think my experience with DH is that it's very hard to say, I'm going to become a digital humanist, I better learn Python. Like you're never, well, you may be better than me. I would never learn Python under those conditions. What's more effective is to sort of get involved in a project that excites you and discover what skills you need to learn. That said, there are really great summer programs that are introductions to digital humanities. None of them are running this summer for obvious reasons, but normally there's a lot of funding for graduate students to participate in all of these programs. So the Digital Humanities Summer Institute is a really great one, and it is beautiful. I have gone and I strongly recommend it. It's in Victoria, British Columbia, and they funded me. So I didn't pay to go. I was able to get funding as a graduate student to attend. HILT, which I can't remember what they stand for, is also a summer institute for training in introductions to digital humanities. It sort of is at a different location every summer. And then the Institutes for Advanced Topics are institutes funded by Digital Humanities, and they're at different locations as well. You apply for those in it's usually December through March, and then participate in the summer. We expect that those programs will be shifting to hybrid or virtual so that you can participate online. And one of the really great things about all of those programs is that they're community building programs. They're really about helping you to develop a cohort of peers who can then provide support, ongoing support and community as you continue to develop skills. If you have a specific skill that you want to learn, I'd also recommend Programming Historian, which is available in multiple languages. And that's just an open access resource with tutorials for all kinds of digital tools and methods.
So you had mentioned that you sort of stumbled upon your job with a mix of networking, sort of, and the job just happened to be there. Are you aware of any jobs right now for someone who's in their 6th year and looking currently in your office? Are there any openings right now?
I don't believe there are. We had a bunch this spring, actually, but they are all in the later stages of interviewing. The NEH and the IMLS and the NEA, which are all areas to look for if you're interested in funding. They are hiring pretty regularly, and unlike most industries, don't seem to be shrinking. Now, we are currently written out of the federal budget for next year, so there's always a question about what's going to happen. Usually we get written back in by the time the budget gets funded. If we do, as we hope, this year we got actually our biggest increase ever, and if we continue to receive funding from Congress, I expect that we'll continue to be hiring just because the need for soft money is growing right now, and Congress seems to be recognizing that.
That's good news. I'm kind of curious about your Twitter presence and LinkedIn sort of presence. I know you're on both. How much does that, having a presence on there, affect sort of career growth and visibility? Can you speak a little bit about how active and why you're active on Twitter as well?
Yeah, I would say that I got my job because of Twitter. And I would say Twitter is my primary source of networking. I know a broad swath of the digital humanities world through Twitter. And that has been really important in my job, which is a lot of my job is about networking and community building and outreach. I use Twitter because I love Twitter. When I was a graduate student, I was very isolated in my department for various reasons. Twitter was the thing that sort of saved me from feeling that I was alone. It helped me find other graduate students who were struggling in the same ways I was struggling and who were excited about the same things that I was excited about and who were my community when I was writing my dissertation. So for me, Twitter has just been so important for that reason. I would never tell anyone you have to use it. Some of my friends are really successful scholars who do not have Twitter, right? I don't think it's required, but if you like it, it can be really beneficial. I don't have a lot of I have been very political on Twitter about higher education. I've made strong statements about my feelings about how higher education functions, and I'm very lucky that my office looks the other way when I do that, which I do, you know, on my own time and things like that. I do think it's probably impacted my job prospects. I think people knew what they were getting with me, but I think that that helped me find a job that was a better fit for what I wanted to do. And since I've left academia, Twitter has been a primary way for me to communicate. I share, you know, I do a lot of work developing resources for graduate students and for postdocs and things like that. And I share all of that through social media. So having that Twitter community has been really essential for that as well.
Okay. I don't want to miss one broad question that I received via email, and that was, how do you respond to stereotypes of PhDs, particularly those with the humanities training, as people who know how to think, but who don't know how to do things? It's a very broad question, but I'm curious to know what you think.
I mean, I personally don't know what writing a dissertation is if not doing something. Also teaching, those seem like doing things. To me, I think that we do a disservice to our graduate students by not helping them learn some of the more active skills that are part of being a scholar, like public speaking, like pedagogy, like writing for a general audience. I think that that's a shame, but I think that really effective scholars do develop those skills, and that those are all active participatory skills. I also think, you know, working at the NEH has just made it so obvious to me that there is so much that humanists and scholars are doing every day, and it's so exciting to see all of that work. I do think we have a bad rap, and I think that that's a shame too. Certainly one of the things that I'm really interested in is making the work that humanists do more visible so that that myth can kind of be deconstructed a little bit.
Okay, a few more questions, just one or two more. You had mentioned that there's plenty rewarding about your current job. You love it, and we know the reasons why you love it. What would you say are some of the challenges working in the government and specifically in digital humanities?
So I found it difficult to transition because I went from feeling at the top of my game to being a beginner again. You know, it's not true that you just get to make a lateral move when you switch careers. I personally had to really, you know, take an not an entry-level position, but like a fairly entry-level position in my field. And that was painful, you know, but I have learned a lot. I feel much more comfortable in the job now. And now I'm able to, again, bring my expertise to bear. And I feel much, much better about that than I did when I first started. But it was a hard transition for me. I think that I do a lot of administrative work. I do a lot of answering like so many emails. I do a lot of, you know, I consider myself a very good and creative writer, but a lot of the writing I do at the NEH is very sort of government-y. It's very formulaic. That's what's expected of me. And you know, that's why focusing on impact has been really important for me. So yeah, I don't love all the emails I answer, but I love that I get to make access to information easier for people and to make people feel heard when they try to talk to the NEH. You know, I don't love doing the government speak, but I do love the outcomes when we are able to get really important work funded. So that's something that's been a transition, and not having as much control over my time was the other big change. I really miss having, I know scholars like to say that they don't have summers off, but they do get to do their summer work from like Mexico, and I really miss that. and maybe not during quarantine, but you know, I really miss that flexibility. But I like having vacation time, and I like having weekends, and I like having evenings. So again, it's a trade.
Yeah, and I usually ask this question during all our government talks because not many people know about the GS scale or government sort of salaries. Not to reveal your salary, but what range are we looking at for a program sort of analyst or specialist position?
Yeah. So I can never remember what my number is on the GS scale, but the job that I have is a $60,000 to $90,000 a year scale. I make $74,000. That was my starting salary, which I was so excited about until I moved to DC. And then I was like, what? That city is so expensive. So, you know, it's a little low for the quality of life I'd like to have in Washington. But that is comparable to the salaries that my friends who are assistant professors are making in their first year, if not better. So I am certainly better than anyone I know working in any other kind of job. So the government, you know, there are really good benefits for working in the government, and I'm really grateful right now for the job security that comes from government work during this time. So I feel really, really fortunate. I turned down an adjunct position. It was a like hybrid postdoc adjunct something at an Ivy League, and I turned it down to take this job. And I am just so glad that I didn't take the riskier position. So.
How long did you do your postdoc for again?
I was in 2 different postdocs for 1 year each.
Okay. Someone wanted to know how you sort of got your postdoc. I suppose you simply applied.
Yeah, although I will say I knew people who had the positions before me. I knew the people, many of them, but not all of the people who were hiring in the positions that I got. So again, Twitter has really helped me in that area.
So talk to people, get curious, network with others, and that's a good plug for tomorrow Justin's talk. He's going to be talking about design your life and how you can utilize radical collaborations and get curious about different opportunities. So I'm going to give you all a few minutes to sort of, if you have any question, you can turn your video on and ask it. Anybody else have any sort of lingering questions? We want to be able to just finish on time. Justin, any more questions? Otherwise, I have one last one from a student that was submitted. It sounds like with any other career, it always sounds like when you're changing or you're starting a new position right out of academia, that you are starting afresh. It is like learning and starting from the beginning. When did you realize that, okay, this job was a good fit for me?
When quarantine hit. I mean, so I've been in this job about 9 months, so I'm very new to this position. And I'm really lucky because this isn't a career change for me. I'm still in my field, right? I was a digital humanist before. I'm a digital humanist now. I work with all the same people, just from a different angle. I attend all the same conferences. I just give different talks at the conferences, and so that, in that sense, the fit was easy to see right away. So that's really different from a lot of my friends who have, gone into technical writing or gone into something like that. But quarantine, the NEH Cares program, I've just felt so grateful to get to be part of emergency relief action in this moment, that it really sort of, I knew, I wanted to work for the NEH because I knew the kinds of service that we do for the community, but it was more theoretical. And so getting to really see that happen in real time has been inspiring for me, so.
Well, Hannah, I just wanted to thank you for your time, for your expertise, and mostly for your just honesty. It's been very refreshing to hear just candor and your wisdom. So thank you so much. I'll be in touch right after this. Thank you everybody for attending. I'm seeing people logging off already, so I'm going to wrap it up. Someone mentioned on Twitter that Zoom should have like a wrap-up thing like they have in the Oscars. So that's pretty much how I feel when I see people dropping off the call. So thank you. Thanks for coming, and thanks for sharing your story with us.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Hannah.
Bye.